guess you have to be hiding under a rock to not know that the country and much of the world are currently baking in this heat wave. And I know that people are dying. But it's a relentless reminder that life is fragile. And it's been the reason why so many people are being duped in this climate panic. What the media fails to do here, what the media fails to do is remind people that this will pass and that there are ways to combat the heat. Again, the media sells an emotional bundle of fear, never tells us what to do, only be afraid. And see, I argue that that is what kills a lot of people because their fears get in the way of practical common sense. I mean, you look back at 1936. I was talking about 1936 before. The facts are a bit daunting compared to a fluke heat wave that we're experiencing now in much of the central United States back in 1936. The summer was even hotter then. At their peak, temperatures in North Dakota were warmer than midsummer Death Valley. It was hot enough to cook a rare steak on the pavement, they say. The heat wave struck during the Great Depression 6 years into a sustained period of crop failure and economic hardship. Tell me if you've heard this story before. You look at the North American heat wave of 1936, followed one of the coldest recorded winters in the same area. Tell me if you've heard this before. It was a cold winter last winter, wasn't it? Didn't Biden call it dark winter? So you have a depression, you have crop failures, farm failures, food failures. And we have this heat wave of 1936, the coldest recorded winters of the same area before that. And you look at the temperatures before the heat wave, temperatures, Devil's Lake plunged to minus 21 degrees. Channel ice in the Illinois River at Peoria grew 19 inches thick. Chesapeake Bay froze entirely. Something has happened only 7 times since the, 1780s. Schools closed in the Pacific Northwest, Great Plains in the Midwest, rural schools in Cottonwood County, Minnesota, losing almost a month of class time. At the time, 1936 had such a frozen start that the idea of a heat wave would have seemed like wishful thinking. And if we need to be reminded, the weather patterns for last winter, like I said, you look at last winter, President called it dark winter. Temperatures would be well into the 80s and 90s in some areas, and then immediately we'd see 20-degree drops. Temperatures dipping into the 20s and 30s in snow, all because of bomb cyclone activity. Evidence, in my opinion, of geoengineering. I mean, no one wants to acknowledge that this is evident of geoengineering, but one can suspect that not only are the geoengineering situations happen with storms, but it can be that this heat is a result of geoengineering. Because we know they're engineering public opinion on this, so why not geoengineer the planet? Why don't we do something that the leaders can come by and say, here we come to save the day? Yeah. The people have been victimized. Their response is to demand, demand, demand. We need world groups to get together. Constituents need to tell tell Joe Biden to declare an emergency, sign treaties. Do it without congressional oversight. We don't care. Well, we know that the members of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations decided to speed up Agenda 2030. That's, of course, the agenda that controls food, water, land, and decides on who will get these resources and who will starve to death and die. It's a sustainability plan. One of the options is depopulation. And history is showing that this knee-jerk reaction and the climate crisis, all manufactured, people. Go back to the 1936 North American heat wave, the history of America's deadly heat wave. Let's see. I was looking this up today. It's called the 1936 North American heat wave, the history of America's deadly heat wave during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. Temperatures were climbing in March. Rainfall became scarce. Storms would give farmers hope. And then we'd see the high temperatures, and they kept going up. By June, there was a drought in the Northeast. There was a feedback loop where the hot, dry ground further heated the air, and the West and the South were experiencing the same conditions. See, back then, they had less resources than we do. And no one was claiming that greenhouse gases were a nuisance and that we needed to be at carbon zero. And I'm sure the argument here would be that, well, they didn't have the scientific information we have now. But does that really matter? Really? They've all been talking about fire and ice for the longest time. You think this matters? It's evidence that what we are going through is no different than before. The truth is, yes, heat is a weather killer, causing more fatalities in an average year than tornadoes, hurricanes, and flooding. But keep in mind that CO2 emissions in 1936 were less than a sixth of what they are now. So why is there such an emergency now? Such an urgency to move heaven and earth to guarantee sustainability as if they have some magic wand capable of controlling the weather. And the only conclusion is that they do have a magic wand. They do have methods of controlling the weather, from the simple laying down of chemtrails or stratospheric aerosol injections to magnetic manipulation of the jet stream. And it's necessary to point out that every problem in society, including earth breakdowns and extreme weather, comes down to the ultra-rich controlling everything and making self-dealing decisions. Remember, they're these philanthropaths. They claim that they are helping humanity. But only if there's a financial gain from helping humanity, they'll help humanity. There's always the possibility that within a few years, the earth can become uninhabitable. There's always that possibility. There's always a possibility you'll have a huge ice age quickly, like they did with the mammoths. One day they wake up and they're frozen solid. But see, no one wants to speak of the resilience of the planet. It may take many years for it to come back, but the planet comes back. If you leave it to its own, it rehabilitates. It always is in transition. The whole area of Mount St. Helens, where the mountain blew up, turned into a nuclear wasteland. It looked like nuclear winter had set in. Everything was broken like twigs. There was mud everywhere. Nothing could live there. You go there now, it's pristine. It's beautiful. It's a great place to go visit because it's just so breathtakingly awesome to see the beautiful trees and how the planet is able to rebuild itself after a major disaster like what happened at Mount St. Helens. So yes, the earth can become uninhabitable. And it can be resilient. But they're planning on uninhabitable. Why? Because they're going to do everything in their power to make it that way. Fire and ice, fire and ice. It's all about fire and ice. Nuclear war, fire to freeze, freezing fire. It's, back in 2006? I remember we were told that if we did nothing to combat global warming, we would have to invest in waders. Now we're begging for air conditioners. And they're saying, oh, it's warming. But last I checked, we're currently heading towards the dog days of summer, where heat always increases before we see a cooling trend towards the autumn and winter months. And I guess that's overly simplistic, but it's even ludicrous, I believe, that one has to point out the obvious here. When I was a kid, there was never a heat advisory when temperatures climbed towards 90 degrees. Now we see heat advisories when temperatures are in the mid-80s. And it's also okay to admit that this so-called consensus science never was there to begin with. Because science is radically divided on these issues of abrupt climate change, and few predict an upsurge anytime soon because they didn't sign up for this world control. They had comments, they had educated guesses, and some of them said, hell, I don't even want to be a part of this anymore. Members of Greenpeace, they jumped ship. A bunch of people jumped ship. Why? Because they knew of the Marxist agenda that was behind Agenda 2030.